It was one of those mornings, one when you knew something would go wrong. Every day, the birds would chirp away at this hour of the morning, but today, it had been eerily quiet, as if announcing the calm before the storm. Beth had been up for half an hour now, but she couldn't find the energy to get out of bed. Today was one of the most important days of her life, and she knew it would somehow define her future. There would be consequences to her actions, but if she wanted to have her own shot at happiness, she needed to be able to find it on her own. She heard a knock at her door. "Sweetie, are you up?" her mother asked, entering her room. Even at 7 in the morning, her mother looked prim and proper. Her face was covered with layers of makeup, and her dress was without a crease. Her mother believed in the importance of presenting a clean and professional image to the world, no matter the scars one held inside of them. Beth had grown up under the constant reminder to smile at every stranger and to never show a sign of weakness, not even to her closest friends. Maria Johnson, Beth's mother, had been lucky to find her mate at 16 years old. She was ecstatic to meet Carl, her mate and Beth's father, who was soon to be alpha to the Johnson pack. In the first few years after their mating ritual, both Carl and Maria had been happy, and she thought the world of him. But things changed after the birth of Beth. Carl was one of those men who believed in becoming the strongest. He was a brutal man whose idea of making a person perfect was through punishment, and one of his greatest regrets in life was that his only child had been a girl. He needed his son to be able to carry on the family name and to pass on the pack's lineage, but much to his shame, as he often reminded Maria in the early years of Beth's life, he had been given a daughter. It was only after then that Maria started to see Carl for the man that he was. At the age of 5, Beth had found her father by the wishing fountain, crying himself while asking the moon goddess why he had been given a daughter instead of a son. She didn't tell her father that she had hurt him, not to this day, but it was then that she had decided to be everything that her father would be proud of. Her father was a hard man to please, as both she and her mother had learned through the years, but both the mother-daughter duo had somehow accomplished the task. Maria became everything Carl wanted. Even though she could never give him a son, she became the strongest Luna their pack had ever seen. Along the way, she lost her charm and the kindness, which she often used to show to Beth as a child. But Beth knew it was because of her mother's mate bond that made her work hard to please and provide happiness to her mate. And deep down, Maria was still the same kind and warm person Beth had seen as a child. As for Beth, she had spent year after year trying to find ways to make her father proud of her. Unfortunately for her, life hadn't given her many opportunities, and the one that it did give her, she did not want to succumb to. "Yes, Mom. Are you going somewhere?" Beth asked her mom. "Yes, darling, to a pack meeting. There is breakfast downstairs. I thought you'd sleep in, but I guess the jitters and the excitement didn't let you, did it?" Maria asked, feeling proud. Beth only managed to nod. "Why don't you get up, shower, and have breakfast? Your father and I should be back in an hour," Maria suggests, smiling. Again, Beth could only manage a nod, tears pooling her eyes, invisible to her mother. Maria kissed Beth's forehead and left, not knowing it would be a while before she would see her daughter again. Once alone, Beth burst into tears. She didn't want this. She did not want to do this to her mother or her father. Her mother, because Beth loved her, and her father, because she knew it would bring Carl shame more than he dared to bear. But to find her own happiness, Beth had to run away. Carl and Maria had decided to engage Beth with Henry, who was the general's son. Beth had grown up with Henry and had also considered him a friend, but to be engaged to him, or to at some point marry him, was not something she imagined herself doing. Henry was nothing but a friend. Period. He was a nice boy, kind and loving, and anyone would be lucky to have him, but he just wasn't meant for Beth. She had these inclinations of finding her mate and feeling that spark of love, the undeniable chemistry when she gets her mate, her one true love. She wanted her heart to fill with so much happiness that it seemed like it would burst every time her mate touched her, and every time Henry touched her, all she felt was emptiness. Because of this reason, Beth had decided to run away today, on the day of the announcement of her engagement to Henry. She had yet to turn into a wolf, yet to find love, her mate, and explore the world, but all Carl wanted was to tie her to someone who would be fit enough to lead the pack. Looking back, Beth could see the hints of her father's plan even when she was a kid. When Carl insisted on her spending time with Henry or inviting him to have dinner with them. There had been times when he would even take time to meet with Henry. Somehow, it had seemed that her father had been training Henry to be the next alpha all his life, and Beth never noticed it. Feeling a headache forming due to her father's antics, she got up. All of a sudden, there were birds outside her window, singing their tune. Beth smiled at them and got ready. She had been smart enough to pack her stuff already, for she had no idea if she would be able to find the time to do it. Her parents never involved her in the packs business, nor did they tell her of their schedule. More often than not, she had to find where they were from Henry, who would always be around the corner. Beth pulled her bag and walked downstairs. Today was the perfect day to run away because she knew everyone would be busy with last-minute preparations for her engagement. She hated to do this to her parents, but she had no other choice. All her life, she had tried to be the perfect daughter, obedient, and someone her parents would be proud of. She had never once done anything for herself and always dressed the way her mother wanted her to and acted the way her father would tell her. This was her first attempt at being rebellious, and she couldn't understand how so many people her age did it. The guilt was eating away at her from the inside. As much as she wanted to find her own happiness, she didn't want to hurt her parents. But then again, if she stayed, Beth feared neither she nor her parents would be much happy, not to mention how miserable both her and Henry would be. Henry, her only friend. There was a part of her who wanted to tell Henry what she was going to do, but she wasn't sure if he would just let her go. Yes, he was her faithful friend, but she had seen her father do some unforgiving things to be in a position of power, and what if Henry was the same? Because of this fear, she only left Henry a letter, the same for her parents, explaining why she was doing this and hoping that they would one day find it in their hearts to forgive her. She ate the breakfast on the table, not knowing how long it would be before she had another home-cooked meal. Her mother had made pancakes, her father's favorite. While eating, she tried to think about where she would go. Beth had made up the plan on running away only 2 days ago when she had heard of her upcoming engagement to Henry. and in the spur-of-the-moment plan, she had yet to figure out where to go. She couldn't go to any neighboring packs, for her father ruled over most of the Northern Territories. Johnson Pack was the most powerful in all of the North. Her father, after years of hard work, many wars, and countless lives lost, had managed to rule over almost all of the Northern Territories, except for one. The Wilson Pack. While Beth had never been with that pack, she knew they were different than most. She had heard the rumors of the beasts from that pack roaming the deep parts of the forest. What was even odder was that she had heard how the members of the Wilson Pack preferred to stay in their wolf form rather than their human form. Given the mystery surrounding that pack, going there was not an option. There was animosity between them, the reason for which neither she nor Henry knew. It was often said that it was because of the war that had happened before she was born, but she had not seen the traces of one, only heard it in stories. Any other pack was out of the question as well, for the leaders would inform her father as soon as she stepped foot into their territory. Her only shot was to go to the town in the outskirts, and then she would be able to move from there. Looking back once at the life she was leaving behind, Beth picked up her bag and ventured out. Her house was located at the far end corner, near the forest, because Carl was fond of running in his wolf form at odd hours of the night. They also had a pack house, right in the middle of their territory, which contained her father's office and the house for the low and destitute of their pack. The pack house was big enough for everyone, and even had a separate wing for the official meetings and other work-related stuff. She walked past some people on her way, nodding and talking to them to not raise suspicion. She also needed to keep at a steady pace until she was deep in the woods. Beth felt pain shoot up her leg, and trying not to wince at it, she kept her walk steady. It took her 15 minutes to reach the pack boundary, and putting one foot out of it, she looked back. Her family. Her friend. The people she grew up with, the only place she knew she had belonged to till now. She was leaving all of that behind. Taking a deep breath, Beth crossed the boundary and kept walking, wanting to get as far away as she could before her father caught her scent or realized that she was missing. He was a smart man, and it wouldn't take him long to understand what she had done. Would he understand her reasons for doing so? No. She walked on ahead, steadying her pace. Her whole leg was throbbing now, and it couldn't have been because she was walking. She tried to divert her mind to the last conversation she had with her father. "Why do you want me to marry him?" she asked her father. "Because I know that he will be a good alpha," her father replied coldly. "But I can find my mate, and he could be the alpha, or you could train me to be one?" Beth asked in a small voice, looking at her mother, who stood by her husband's seat, refusing to look her own daughter in the eye. "We may be a progressive pack, but it does not mean that you will become alpha. And because you carry an alpha's blood, your mate might also be an alpha who would try to take you away. What would happen to our pack then? Who would it go to then?" Carl asked, his wolf tendency rising within him. Beth could feel her father's anger and her mother's silent pleas for her to be quiet on the subject and return to her room, but she knew that she had to try. She would never be able to forgive herself if she left without trying to talk her father out of it. The regret would eat her alive that she could have tried. But in all honesty, she knew her father would never agree to her not marrying Henry. His decision, once said, was written in stone. But she just had to try for her own sanity. We can try to find a way around it. And what is to say my mate would not take me anyway once he finds me? Beth tried. You are naughty if you think he would take you away or even look at you knowing that you are married and mated to another man. No respecting wolf would accept his mate like that, Carl said out loud, declaring the topic to be done and over it. Weeping, Beth retired to her room, pulled out the duffel bag, and packed herself some clothes. She wouldn't be able to take all of her stuff, so she would only have to make do with the things she would need. Thankfully, she had been saving money for some time now and had enough to last in the town for a month. Once she was packed with everything, she picked up a picture of her family. She had been 4 at the time and sitting on her mother's lap, who was smiling like an angel. Her father had a scowl on his face, but he still had his arm wrapped around her mother as their family posed for the picture. Pulling it out of the frame, Beth packed it with her stuff too and hid everything else under her bed. Her arm twitched, and she winced in pain. Her whole body felt like it was on fire. Beth looked around and saw she was deep within the woods and had lost her way. She had no idea on whose territory she was. Her eyes blurred. She crouched on the ground, her bag thrown away as she felt her spine shoot out. It was immense pain, worse than she had ever felt. She felt her bones breaking and her world spinning. Opening her mouth, she tried to shout for help, but all that came out was a whine, in a voice she couldn't recognize as her own. Beth felt her body shift, and her eyes resumed their vision. And somehow, it was better than before. She could see things more clearly, the leg of ants on the ground and the crow sitting on the tree above her. The bees rasping about an unknown flower on her west, and the tress of mushroom providing shade to a strange insect on her east. Not only her sight, but she could also hear better too. Her ears were picking up on sounds she had never heard before. Still on her knees, she tried to turn around, and then she saw a white tail. Mesmerized by it, she looked down to see her legs were now covered in white fur as well. As if the world suddenly made sense to her, Beth realized that she had finally turned into her wolf form. The evidence was there. Her heightened senses and sight. Her body was covered in fur, and most of all, the absence of pain, which only minutes ago had her wanting to cry out in agony. Smiling at herself, she walked around on all 4 of her paws in one straight line. Once the task was accomplished, she howled, feeling proud of her accomplishment. Never once had she thought about how complete it would make her feel to turn into her wolf form. All her life, she had been around wolves, but until you turn into one, her pack's rules dictated that it wouldn't be talked of. To turn into your wolf form was something sacred, and each had to experience it for the first time without assistance and guidance from others. To turn into one and then transition into your human form was an art, a mythical way that one had to do themselves. Many times, parents would leave their kids alone in the woods in the winter for them to find their wolves. Other times, parents who couldn't bear to leave their kids alone in the cold night would stand up, arm in arm with their mates, waiting for their pups to turn into their wolf form all by themselves. The parents would just stand there, not saying a word, their eyes brimming with pride. Unfortunately for Beth, neither of her parents was there to be proud of her. In fact, There was no one to see her transition into a white wolf that was only heard of in folklores. Pulling her back with her jaws, Beth stood to her wolf's full height, trying to make sense of the direction she would take. After coming to a decision to walk to the far east, opposite her own pack, she began to run down the path, feeling the wind yap at her fur. The feeling was better than anyone could have ever told her. She continued to walk in that direction, still in her wolf form. She also had no idea how to change back into her human form. Suddenly, the fur on her back rose as if she was being watched. Beth turned around and saw two wolves standing before her. Both the wolves were twice her size, and she had no chance of taking them down. No matter how hard she tried. She backed away, wanting to make a run for it, when the more enormous wolf stepped in her direction, halting her movements. Beth wanted to show her neck as a sign of respect to save her life, but her wolf form wouldn't let her. As if the wolf's unconscious could hear Beth's own thoughts, so it became stiff. Unwavering at the sight of the two other wolves before her. Beth knew it was her alpha blood that was refusing to bow down to anyone, but for her to make it out of the woods alive, she needed to give in. It was a sign of great intelligence to know when to give up and when to fight, Beth had read somewhere. Beth didn't have much experience in fighting, and she knew the odds of her being able to come out of this situation alive were next to none. It wasn't because she wasn't physically able to take part in her pack's training, but because her father had often told her that she didn't need to take part in the movement, or fighting, if it ever came to it, for she was meant to stay home and nurse the soldiers of her pack. They were out there making the world a better place for her and everyone else. Even more so, every time she was bullied for her physical appearance, or any other feature of her appearance, Henry, or one of her father's guards sent to protect the heir to the throne of their pack, would always be there to fight on her behalf. At one point, Beth had asked, nay begged, Henry to teach her to fight, after which he had only one reply. But darling, you won't ever need to fight. I will always be here to protect you. Well, Henry, you aren't here right now. Beth mentally cursed him but then stopped short, for it wasn't his fault. Had she stayed in her home and abided by her father's wishes, she wouldn't have found herself in this life-and-death situation. The wolves before her growled, getting tired of waiting. They lunged forward, both at the same time, only to be thrown against a tree. The moment had been so fast that Beth hadn't seen the new wolf. He was more significant than the rest of them and threw them both just with his head. He stood guard before Beth, shielding her body from the upcoming fight. Then she took in a breath. Her mind was shouting one thing while her senses were diluted by the scent of the most majestic of smells. She hadn't ever inhaled a smell more beautiful. Mate! Mate! Mate? Her mind shouted. She looked at the wolf that had come as her savior and realized what it meant. In the darkest part of the woods, on the day she ran away from her home, she had been attacked, but her mate had come to her rescue. Lost in the feeling of rejoicing, she didn't notice the jaw on her leg. It made her tumble to the ground, releasing a howl of pain. Then the attacking wolf showed her his canines, and went for her neck. Before she knew it, her eyes fell shut. Whether from the impact or from the pain of it, she had no idea,